Ash, want some fish? As predicted, the snow disappeared completely overnight. The dogs woke ready to go out, as they're fully into the routine of a morning drive and a walk. They're in for a shock next week, as Robin starts a new job and she'll be gone for 4 days of the week with the car. Come to think of it, I'm in for a shock too. We headed to Irvine Beach. It was cold and windy, but we dressed for the occasion, unlike this guy in shorts coming out of the water. I took the M10R with the Zeiss Biogun lens. At 2.8, the Zeiss isn't as fast as the Voigtlander Nocton 1.4, but over the last year or so I've actively been avoiding shooting wide open unless necessary. This is partially because I've tried to rely more on zone focusing, so shooting at 5.6 or f16, the depth of field is much larger, but more importantly because I want my compositions to actually improve without relying on blurring the background beyond recognition. Anyway, this was probably the most fruitful day for photos this week. Even though a lot feel very snapshotty, I don't really mind that. As we headed back to the car, we walked up this little hill and I noticed this bench in the distance. I love how minimal this photo is, even though it looks like the poster of a movie that's been nominated for way too many awards. Unsurprisingly, it was pissing down. Some mandarin ducks had been spotted at Balak, and Robin hadn't seen one before. As it's only 20 minutes up the road, we drove out to find one. We were unsuccessful, but we did spot a handsome looking Pete on the ramp into the loch. Another day with particularly uninspiring light. We drove to Hoganfield Loch, and I obviously made photos regardless. It's been very easy to feel like what's the point with photos this week, but Robin keeps reminding me that not all days will have the perfect lighting conditions, just have to ride it out. To be honest, I don't even mind that the weather is grey and the light is flat, sometimes I even prefer it. But when actively making photos every day, large stints of samey weather are increasingly apparent, so I'm naturally craving something to shuffle it up a bit. You'll notice a few photos with crops like this. The aspect ratio I'm using in Lightroom I think is 1:2.78, which I believe to be the equivalent of the Hasselblad X-Pan. Trying aspect ratios that differ from 4:6 and 4:5 is something new for me, but with the resolution offered with the M10R and the Q2, I actually feel comfortable cropping like this and not sacrificing details if I ever want to make a large print. The middle of the week was a slog and we decided to tidy the flat. I rearranged the studio after having neglected it since we had guests at Christmas when it functioned as a spare room. I'd like to say this is where the creative magic happens, but really I'm just a spiral of despair thanks to the gigantic weight of my imposter syndrome. After almost an entire day of cleaning and sorting the previous day, I needed to finish other parts of the flat such as the pots in the kitchen, which are the absolute bane of my existence. I dealt with it in a completely reasonable way. I procrastinated by disassembling and sanding a guitar instead. The original blue colour looked cheap, and so as a collaboration project with Robin, we've opted for a nice pinky lilac for the body. I need some filler to fix the damage, and we'll need to sand that down again, but I'm looking forward to painting the thing and putting it back together. The weather has mostly been awful this week. Not awful for walking, but awful for taking photos. I've not been feeling particularly inspired, but we went back to Belgrave Reservoir to get some steps in and hoped that I could maybe get some photos that I liked. But no, the dull weather was truly here to stay. I fired off a couple of snapshots before heading to band practice. In case it's not been glaringly obvious over these past two videos, we love a body of water, so we took a walk around Strathclyde Loch for the first time. It was a good 3 or so miles all the way around, and Marshall made plenty of friends along the way. I managed to make a photo of this man feeding the swans, before Marshall invited himself to partake in the all-you-can-eat buffet of bread and mud. Robin's start day at work is looming closer, and to make the most of the time we had left, we jumped in the car and headed to the beach at Ayr. The dogs found this fish carcass. I'd just been taking some macro photos and didn't notice that the lens was wide open, so the focus trails off at the back there, which is disappointing, but overall I like the detail on its head and some of the scales on its body. Robin pointed out a line of rocks in the sea which would have been an interest to me, so I made my way across the beach and the slippy rock pools, determined to take an award-winning photo. There's no video footage there, or a photo. I couldn't get the angle right, and with a few miles to walk back to the car on sand, I wasn't particularly interested in getting my feet wet either. We did, however, find a worm that wanted to eat Robin. Look at it, it's minging.
Trying to dig its way in.
Can you see it?
No. Why is Pete swimming, please?
According to my step counter, I've walked close to 45 miles this week, or 72 kilometres depending on what you use. As this was also Dublin as a treat day and we had fish and chips by the sea, I may have accidentally wound up with 2 fish in the process, but I wasn't complaining. God bless Scotland. I was uncomfortably full afterwards, it was glorious. And that was it. We headed to the cinema to watch Scream. 10 out of 10 would stab again.